Hello, everyone, and welcome to Archaeo Viking. Today is the official fourth video and unofficial second video of my series on early U.S. Imperial expansion. The subject of today's video is quite possibly one of, well, no, it most definitely is one of the most famous events in United States history, and that is the Louisiana Purchase and the Lewis and Clark expedition. So, for those of us who have grown up in the United States, and for those who are outside, the Louisiana Purchase what is a large tract of land that included um, a lot of modern day U.S. states, such as the name implies, Louisiana, but also parts of Texas, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, all the way up to Montana and Wyoming. And this purchase was done. This land was purchased by the United States in 1803 CE or AD, and it was explored fairly thoroughly by two of the, uh, again, much like the Louisiana Purchase, two of the most famous individuals in United States history, uh, Lewis and Clark. And the reason I am including this video on the Lewis and Clark expedition and the Louisiana Purchase in my series on early U.S. Imperial expansion is because this very much was an imperial venture, as we will talk about in the video. So, starting off, let's look at the political background to the Louisiana Purchase. Well, for much of the colonial history of North America, i.e., after Europeans began colonizing North America, the French Empire is the European imperial power that held control over, at least nominally, uh, over the region that would eventually become known as the Louisiana Purchase, this vast region here that they called the Louisiana Territory. However, after the British defeated the French in the Seven Years' War, the British Empire was able to gain possessions of multiple French colonies, much of the colonial possessions in North America, as you can see here, mainly right around what is now modern day Quebec, but also areas such as parts of modern day Alabama, Tennessee, Mississippi, etc. Meanwhile, at the exact same time that Britain was gaining control of all of these areas you see here in red, uh, up here in Canada, the Spanish Empire was also gaining possession of French territories in North America as a result of the Seven Years' War. Uh, Specifically gaining possession of all the French territory west of the Mississippi, thereby creating essentially a division uh, between of North America between the Spanish Empire and the British Empire. And of course, as many of you know, only a decade, maybe a decade and a half or so later, the American Revolution would happen that would in itself result in the creation of first the Articles of Confederation, but eventually lead to the creation of the much more unified and stable and cohesive United States of America. And here is the American Revolution here, and here is a map of the United States as it was around 1789 CE. During this time, during the creation of the United States and after, the city of New Orleans would become very important to the United States for shipping agricultural goods to and from the areas west of the the Appalachian Mountains. And here is a picture of New Orleans here. Because of this, eventually the U.S. and Spain agreed to sign what is known as Piccaninny's Treaty, which gave American merchants the right to, and I quote, deposit in New Orleans, granting them the use of the port to store goods for export, and also leading Spain to recognize American rights to navigate the entire Mississippi, which, much like New Orleans, has also become vital to the growing trade of the Western territories. And this treaty would be signed in 1795 CE. However, the political situation changes when Spain cedes Louisiana territory back to France as part of Napoleon's secret Third Treaty of San Ildefonso on March of 1801 CE. Um, and furthermore, in a subsequent treaty, the subsequent treaty of Aranjuez, Spain agreed to exchange Louisiana for Tuscany, uh, and and would establish that Spain's cession of Louisiana was a quote restoration of the territory to France, not a retrocession. This would be further exacerbated in the United States when fear of an eventual French invasion began to spread across America because of Napoleon's invasion of the former French colony of Saint Domingue to put down what eventually would become known as the Haitian Revolution. Which leads us to our next section. So, the French army in Saint Domingue would begin to suffer from heavy casualties at the hands of revolutionary leader Toussaint Louverture, seen here. And so, because of that, Jefferson would actually send Robert Livingston to Paris, hoping to, or Paris, depending on if you're using the English or French pronunciation, hoping to negotiate the purchase of New Orleans on March 4th of 1801 CE. Uh, in addition to this, French diplomat and nobleman Pierre Samuel Dupont de Nemours would also begin negotiating with France on behalf of Jefferson. Uh, Intent on avoiding possible war with France, Jefferson would then send James Monroe to Paris to negotiate a settlement, with instructions to go to London to negotiate an alliance if talks in Paris failed. And this would happen in 1803 CE. Eventually, all of these factors together would lead to Napoleon deciding to abandon his plans to rebuild France's New World Empire. Because one, without sufficient revenues from sugar colonies such as Saint Domingue in the Caribbean, Louisiana really was not worth anything to him. Furthermore, he was dealing with the fact that Spain was sort of dragging its feet and refusing to complete the transfer of Louisiana to France, and was further refusing to cede Florida to France. And then what is probably what we could argue is the most pressing matter that Napoleon was facing is that war between France and England was imminent. Therefore, all of these factors meant that in the long run, Louisiana was indefensible. Now, of course, if Napoleon had decided to invade with his army and force, he probably would have succeeded in at least temporarily taking back Louisiana. After all, his army was one of the best in the world at the time, but that didn't necessarily mean he could, permanently defend it, especially if Britain decided to help the United States invade Louisiana territory. So, with all that, he would offer to sell the entire Louisiana territory to the U.S. For $15 million. To put this in perspective, James Monroe and Jefferson and Livingston were offering only wanted to buy New Orleans and were offering $10 million for New Orleans. So for only $5 million more, they got like I don't even know what the ratio of land could be compared to, but like a whole lot more land just for a little bit more money. And this deal would be offered on March 1803 CE. Though there was some opposition to this negotiation, because Federalists specifically would strongly oppose the purchase because of the costs involved, their belief that France would, in the end, not be able to resist invading the U.S., and they were also worried about British encroachment into Louisiana. They also saw this as essentially a hypocrisy on the part. This purchase is a hypocrisy on the part of Jefferson, and they especially feared that the power of the Atlantic seaboard states would be threatened by these new territories, by citizens moving into these new territories, and they were concerned with that the purchase would increase the number of slaveholding states created out of the new territory and would therefore exacerbate divisions between already existing divisions between North and South. And the leaders of this party were Alexander Hamilton and John Adams. Also, because of these issues, a group of Northern Federalists, led by Senator Timothy Pickering of Massachusetts, would actually go so far as to explore the idea of breaking away from the United States and create a separate Northern Confederacy. However, eventually, despite this opposition, the United States Senate would consent to the ratification of the treaty with a vote of 24-7 and would authorize Jefferson to take possession of the territory and establish a temporary military government. And this happened somewhere between October 20th to December 20th, 1803 CE. And with France officially transferring Louisiana over to the United States on December 20th, 1803 CE, with Louisiana officially becoming the Louisiana Territory of the United States. Which leads us to our next section. So, having long held interest in exploring this mostly unknown region of the continent, Jefferson would go on to create what is known as the Corps of Discovery, and would place that corps under command of Captain Meriwether Lewis and his close friend, Second Lieutenant William Clark. And here is Lewis and Clark. Again, what I would argue, two of the most famous, two of the most famous individuals in United States history. Before this expedition, though, Jefferson would actually send Lewis to Philadelphia to study a variety of different sciences in preparation for this expedition, including learning the use of the sextant and other navigational instruments under Andrew Elcott, studying medicinal cures under Benjamin Rush, studying how to preserve plant and animal specimens under Smith Barton, etc., etc. And he would also go on to learn how to examine fossils and search for possible living remnants of Ice Age megafauna from Caspar Worcester. And this was because Jefferson believed that animals such as the mammoth, the woolly mammoth, still existed west of the Mississippi. During this time also, Lewis and Clark would begin recruiting for the Corps of Discovery, with early members of the Corps of Discovery including John Ordway, Charles Floyd, and somebody who was most definitely there against his will, York, the enslaved African American of William Clark. They then began to have a keelboat built to Lewis's specifications on August 31st, 1803 CE. which now leads us to the journey itself. So the core discovery departed from what is known as Camp Dubois, also known as Camp Wood, near Cahokia and St. Louis on May 14th, 1804 CE. And it's important to note what the goals of this expedition were. So the goals of the expedition are to explore the vast territory acquired in this Louisiana Purchase and to establish trade and U.S. sovereignty over the Native American nations along the Missouri River, as well as to establish a U.S. claim of discovery to the Pacific Northwest and Oregon Territory by documenting American presence there before other European nations such as Spain and Britain and Russia can claim the land, and also to find an all-water route to the Pacific coast in commerce, a continuation of what is known as essentially the Northwest Passage theory, where people try to find a Northwest Passage to get to the Pacific. And here is a map including a lot of, but not all of, the Native American nations that resided within the Louisiana Purchase, and here is the Oregon Territory. Shortly after the expedition departs, though, there would be some degree of tragedy as Sergeant Charles Floyd, one of the early recruits, would die from acute appendicitis, though it is important to note he is the only member to die in the entire expedition, and he would die on August 20th of 1804 CE. Eventually, the expedition would meet the Lakota Nation and came close to fighting them several times, as the expedition believed that the Lakota were responsible for the theft of one of the expedition's horses. However, no fighting broke out, and eventually both sides backed down, and the expedition would continue on to the Arikara territory. And here are the Lakota, and here's an Arikara village. And this would all happen in the fall of 1804 CE. However, once they got into the Arikara territory, tensions yet again would arise between the expedition and the Arikara, when one of the chiefs of the Arikara asked Lewis and Clark to provide a boat in return for allowing the expedition passage through their national territory. But the two sides would fall back in the end. And this would lead to the Americans quickly continuing westward and eventually setting up a winter camp in the Mandan Nations territory on sometime in October of 1804 CE. And here are some Mandan villages. The party would then proceed to build what is known as Fort Mandan near present-day Washburn, North Dakota, to spend the winter. Once in Mandan territory, for several days, Lewis and Clark would meet with the Council of Mandan Chiefs. And also, while in the Mandan territory, the expedition would meet French-Canadian fur trapper, would meet a French-Canadian fur trapper named Toussaint Charbonneau, and his young non-consensual, and I need to stress that very clearly, they were not happily married, non-consensual Shoshone wife, Sacagawea or Sacagawea. I've heard it pronounced a variety of different ways. And I'm very sure that the Sacagawea is one of the most famous individuals in United States history. Anyways, so upon meeting these two, Charbonneau would begin to serve as the expedition's translator. Once he began serving as the expedition's translator, peace would be established between the expedition and the Mandan chiefs, with the sharing of a Mandan ceremonial pipe, as you see here. Also, during their stay in this winter camp, Lewis and the expedition's interpreters, including five men, would embark on a diplomatic mission to a Hidatsa village. At the same time that was happening, two Hidatsa chiefs would come to Fort Mandan with similar intentions. And here are two Hidatsa chiefs here. And this would happen November 25th of 1804 CE. After this, on December 7th of 1804 CE, several Mandan hunters would tell Lewis and Clark that there is a large buffalo herd nearby. And so with that, with that information, Lewis would organize a group of hunters, of course, some consisting of the Americans in his expedition and of the Mandan horsemen and hunters. And in fact, during this hunt, the members of the expedition would become very impressed with the ability of the Mandan hunters, as well as with their well-trained horses. And here is a depiction of that buffalo hunt here. In February 1st of 1805 CE, in the beginning of the new year of the succeeding year, a Hidatsa chief would bring in corn as payment to Fort Mandan to pay the blacksmiths within the expedition for making a war axe. The captains would then try to talk him out of his intention to go fight the Lakota and the Sioux specifically, but presumably the Lakota and the Arikara. And here's that event there. Further on in further on in the year of 1805, two Hidatsa chiefs of one of the largest Hidatsa villages would visit Fort Mandan, where they would receive several gifts, such as peace medals that Lewis and Clark had brought with them as gifts to give in diplomatic exchanges. And Lewis would also demonstrate to one of the two chiefs how to use his Austrian repeating air rifle. And you can see that here. And this would all happen between March 9th and March 22nd of 1805 CE. Eventually, starting on April 5th, 1805 CE, the members of the expedition would begin loading 2 pirogi and 6 canoes with supplies and other things they needed to continue their expedition. And here's a pirogi boat, and here is then a canoe. However, before departing, the expedition would send their killboat back to St. Louis with a sample of specimens, of animals, plants, etc., some of which had never been seen before east of the Mississippi. And this would happen on April 7th of 1805 CE. After leaving Fort Mandan, the expedition would spend several days traveling through Hidatsa territory through much of April of 1805 CE. Eventually, the expedition would reach a Shoshone village, where the expedition would begin to negotiate with the village's chief, and who turned out to be Sacagawea's brother, Kemahwat, who agreed to barter horses and provide guides to lead the expedition over the Rocky Mountains. And this would happen in August 19th, 1805 CE. And here is that diplomatic meeting and reunion. Because again, I very much want to stress this. Sacagawea was taken against her will from her family. So this was what I can only imagine was a very heartfelt and arguably bittersweet reunion between the two siblings. After stopping in Sacagawea's Shoshone village, the expedition would briefly and peacefully meet with the Salish nation on September 5th, 1805 CE. And there's that scene here. Following that, they would begin to make their mountain crossing, attempting to cross the Rocky Mountains, though the mountain crossing would take longer than expected, and the expedition's food supplies would begin to dwindle. After that, and because of the difficulties that the expedition was facing, Clark would take an advance party on ahead to find food and help essentially chart the way and such for Lewis's group. And in the process of doing that, he would reach the Waipa prairie villages where the group briefly and peacefully met with Nez Perce women who were gathering and baking camas balls. And this would happen on September 20th of 1805 CE. Following that, eventually the expedition would finally reach the Pacific Ocean in Oregon Territory on November 20th of 1805 CE. After reaching the Pacific Ocean in Oregon Territory, the expedition would camp along the Columbia River and construct Fort Clatsop to spend the winter. And this would happen on November 24th of 1805 CE. While wintering on the Columbia River, Lewis and Clark would meet several times with the local Chinook village, gaining vital information about river routes, where to find food, etc. Which brings us to our next section, the return journey. The expedition would begin its return journey and making their way to Camp Chopunish, where they would spend several weeks with the Nez Perce, and this would happen on March 23rd of 1806 CE. Before recrossing the Continental Divide, the Corps would split up into two teams, and this was done so Lewis could explore the Marias River on July 3rd of 1806 CE. And there is the Maria River there. Once they split, Sacagawea would advise Clark to cross into the Yellowstone River Basin at what is now known as the Bozeman Pass on July 13th of 1806 CE. During their trek through Wyoming and the Bozeman Pass, Clark's group would enter the territory of the Crow Nation and would actually have half of their horses stolen in the night, but the group would not see any Crow warbands, Crow horsemen, etc. at all. And this would happen on July 17th, 1806 CE. And there's a Crow band there. Meanwhile, with Lewis's group of 4 men would meet men from the Blackfeet Nation. And during the night, these Blackfeet men would try to steal the group's weapons. And in a struggle, the soldiers would kill 2 Blackfeet men. After which, Lewis and his group would flee over 100 miles in a day before they decided to camp again. And this would happen on July 26th, 1806 CE. And there is a picture of Blackfeet warriors here. The 2 groups would eventually reunite at the confluence of the Yellowstone and Missouri rivers. They then would quickly return down the Missouri River to St. Louis. And this would happen between August 11th and September 23rd, 1806 CE. Which now brings us to our next section, the aftermath of this expedition. So, right after the success of the Lewis and Clark expedition, the U.S. government would begin to assert its possession of the Louisiana Territory by building several forts in the region, such as Fort Osage that you see here. And they would construct these forts sometime between 1808 and 1819 CE. Furthermore, Lewis and Clark would publish their journal entries. Now, they had admittedly tried to publish their journal entries essentially as soon as they got back to the into St. Louis and the United States proper, but they had a lot of trouble with it, and so the journals were not officially published until 1814 CE. Then we get to the three biggest legacies of the Lewis and Clark expedition. One, the Lewis and Clark expedition would inspire one of its sort of sequel expeditions, the Astoria expedition to Oregon, which happened between 1809 and 1813 CE, a subject that I will cover in the next video. Also, the Lewis and Clark expedition at least partially influenced what would become known as the Oregon Trail, that was heavily used by U.S. settlers to reach the Oregon Territory during the 1840s, and also a little bit before and after, but the height of it was in the 1840s CE. But the absolute biggest legacy of the Lewis and Clark expedition is that it laid the groundwork for U.S. colonization of Native American lands, both east of the Mississippi and west of the Mississippi, specifically laying the groundwork for what would eventually become known as the Indian removal, upon which the five civilized tribes of the American South, as well as several Native American nations in the North, being forcibly, often resulting in thousands and thousands of casualties, forcibly removed to the west of the Mississippi to what would eventually become known as Indian Territory and eventually Oklahoma Territory. And it would also lay the groundwork for what would eventually become known as the Plains Indian Wars, which started around 1823 and lasted until 1912 CE, arguably even a little bit after that. And with that, that ends our video on the Lewis and Clark expedition and its role in U.S. imperial expansion. With that, I hope everyone enjoyed the video. And remember, if you want to see me cover any subjects I mentioned in the video in greater details in later videos, please feel free to leave a comment in the comment section. And remember to like, share, and subscribe. And I hope you all have a good day.